298 days. Count that out. That's not a few missed weeks, not a short stint on the injured reserve list, not the kind of absence you shake off with a couple of shoot-arounds and a good night's sleep. 298 days is almost an entire year of your life watching other people do the one thing you were built to do. And for Caitlin Clark, the biggest name women's basketball has seen in a generation, every one of those days carried a specific kind of weight that most athletes never have to know. It started in the summer of 2025, when a groin injury didn't just shelve her for a stretch of games, it took the whole season. Gone. Not a week, not a month, the entire 2025 WNBA campaign disappeared from her grasp before it ever really got started. And what made it particularly brutal wasn't just the pain or the rehab or the uncertainty. It was having to sit in the building wearing street clothes, watching Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell and the rest of the Indiana Fever play game after game without her. She said it herself afterward, she was their biggest fan. She was in that arena cheering, supporting, living and dying with every possession. But if you know anything about competitors who operate at that level, you understand exactly what that kind of support costs. It costs something deep, because being the biggest fan in the building when you want more than anything to be on the floor is its own private hell. So when March of 2026 finally arrived and she got back to live basketball, playing for Team USA in the FIBA qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico, it was more than a return. It was proof. She walked away from that tournament as MVP, dominant enough that whatever doubts might have existed about whether she could still perform at a high level were answered. 298 days. Count that out. That's not a few missed weeks, not a short stint on the injured reserve list, not the kind of absence you shake off with a couple of shoot-arounds and a good night's sleep. 298 days is almost an entire year of your life watching other people do the one thing you were built to do. And for Caitlin Clark, the biggest name women's basketball has seen in a generation, every one of those days carried a specific kind of weight that most athletes never have to know. It started in the summer of 2025, when a groin injury didn't just shelve her for a stretch of games, it took the whole season. Gone. Not a week, not a month, the entire 2025 WNBA campaign disappeared from her grasp before it ever really got started. And what made it particularly brutal wasn't just the pain or the rehab or the uncertainty. It was having to sit in the building wearing street clothes, watching Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell and the rest of the Indiana Fever play game after game without her. She said it herself afterward, she was their biggest fan. She was in that arena cheering, supporting, living and dying with every possession. But if you know anything about competitors who operate at that level, you understand exactly what that kind of support costs. It costs something deep, because being the biggest fan in the building when you want more than anything to be on the floor is its own private hell. So when March of 2026 finally arrived and she got back to live basketball, playing for Team USA in the FIBA qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico, it was more than a return. It was proof. She walked away from that tournament as MVP, dominant enough that whatever doubts might have existed about whether she could still perform at a high level were answered before the WNBA season even opened. She came back and she showed out. But she was also honest about what that tournament was and what it wasn't. She told reporters flat out that playing for the Fever in front of the home crowd gives you a different juice inside your body compared to other competitions. Puerto Rico was a proving ground. Indianapolis was home. Opening night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse had an energy that you don't manufacture. You can't pipe that in. The crowd was packed and electric before she even touched the ball, and the loudest moment of the pregame wasn't the starting lineups or the music or the ceremony. It was her introduction. Because 298 days of waiting from a fan base that had spent nearly a year tracking injury updates and hoping turns a season opener into something that goes beyond basketball. It becomes personal. For those fans, the night felt like getting something back that had been taken from them. And for Clark, she admitted to feeling something she said she genuinely missed. She told reporters before tip-off that she was excited, way more excited than nervous. That's what she said. But people who watched her pregame shoot-around noticed something else. Her hands weren't totally steady. And that gap between what she said publicly and what her body was quietly doing tells you everything about what this night actually meant and what it cost her to get there. She wasn't being dishonest with the media. She was being honest about what she wanted it to mean and letting the nerves be what they were going to be. And she actually said she welcomed them. She told reporters she'd missed having the butterflies in her stomach before a game. Missed them. She said she loves that feeling and that when it's there, it means you're ready. She was right. The first half, though, it didn't go the way anyone would have scripted it. Clark was feeling out the speed of real WNBA basketball again. After months away, there's a sharpness that only comes back through live competition, and it wasn't fully there yet. The rhythm was off, turnovers piled up, the rust was visible, and the Dallas Wings defense, a revamped unit under coach Jose Fernandez running a system built on spacing, ball movement, and multi-positional reads, made her work for every single inch. There were stretches in that first half where you could see the hesitation, the extra half second where the decision that normally comes instantly had to be thought through. That's not weakness. That's what 298 days of absence looks like, even on a player of her caliber. And then the third quarter arrived.
She caught the ball near the elbow, froze her defender with a spin move, and fired a behind-the-back pass to Misha Hines-Allen without even looking, hitting her in stride for an easy finish. The crowd didn't just cheer, they erupted, because that pass doesn't come from practice reps or defensive scheme recognition or game planning. That pass comes from pure feel, from something that lives so deep in a player's instincts that 298 days of sitting out can't touch it. Her vision never left, her court sense never left, and when that third quarter began and she started to impose herself, the fieldhouse became a completely different place. Midway through the game, she made 2 trips to the tunnel, and fans online immediately started spiraling, completely understandably, about whether something had happened to her groin again. Coach Stephanie White cleared it up after the game. The tunnel trips were routine back adjustments, part of the process of managing her body through the physical demands of playing at that speed after a long absence. Clark herself said she felt great and that she was just getting her back put back in place. Routine, nothing more. She finished with 20 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds, alongside 5 turnovers. That box score is exactly what a real comeback looks like. Not perfect, not immaculate, but still dominant in the moments that mattered. While Clark was grinding through that first half rust, Kelsey Mitchell had already made a decision. She was not going to let this game be quiet. Mitchell dropped 30 points on opening night, and that number by itself sounds like a big game until you find out what it actually meant historically. She broke the Indiana Fever franchise record for most points scored in a season opener, a record that had been sitting there for years, and Mitchell knocked it down like it was nothing. What made her performance so important wasn't just the volume, though, it was the context. On a night when your star player is shaking off nearly a year of absence and feeling out the speed of the game again, someone needs to hold the rope early. Someone needs to carry the load while the most important player on your roster finds her footing. Mitchell didn't wait for Clark to warm up. She attacked from the jump, was efficient, relentless, and gave Indiana a foundation to build on before the night really got going. Aaliyah Boston was doing something different entirely on the other end of the story. She only played 26 minutes. In that time, she put up 23 points and 4 rebounds, moving through transitions and creating mismatches that the Wings simply couldn't contain. Analysts were already putting her name in all WNBA conversations before the week was even a week old, and watching what she did in 26 minutes against Dallas, it's not hard to understand why. 23 points in 26 minutes while creating problems in transition is the kind of performance that makes opposing coaches re-watch film the next morning with a very different expression on their face. So you've got Clark at 20, Mitchell at 30, Boston at 23, and that combination put Indiana in genuinely rare territory. Those three all cracking 20 in the same game made them only the third trio in WNBA history to do it in a season opener. Only the third time ever, and the first time the Indiana Fever franchise had ever seen it happen. That's not something that occurs just because three talented players show up. It requires all three to be locked in on the same night and delivering simultaneously, and that's exactly what Indiana got. Off the bench, sophomore Michaela Timpson went 5 for 6 from the field for 11 points in 19 minutes, and that might be the quietest important performance of the whole night. With Monique Billings out, the Fever needed someone from the second unit to step up and not let the depth problem become a scoreboard problem. Timpson answered that, going 5 for 6 as a sophomore in your season opener off the bench in a packed house with all the noise that came with Clark's return. That's a steady performance from a young player who didn't blink. Lexi Hall also came back from hamstring tightness with limited minutes, and even just having her available matters for Indiana's rotation going forward. When Hall is healthy and locked in, she provides a layer of defensive versatility that takes real pressure off the top three. All of it together pushed Indiana to the highest scoring season opener in Fever franchise history, worth sitting with for a second, given that they spent the first half still getting their legs under them as a unit. And both teams combining to crack 100 made this the first season opener in WNBA history where both sides finished in triple digits. That has never happened before on opening night in this league. But it was the records that really told the larger story about where Clark's career is heading and how fast she's getting there.
Monique Billings being absent was felt on both ends of the floor. When she's not in the lineup, Indiana loses the defensive rebounding and physical interior presence she brings, and the margin for error in the rotation shrinks fast. The Wings knew that. Odyssey Sims, Jessica Shepard, and Alana Smith all contributed passes and spacing that prevented Indiana's defense from loading up on one or two people. Dallas kept finding the open man, kept moving the ball, and kept Indiana's defense guessing the whole night, especially alongside an efficient offensive player like Paige Bueckers, who ran the Wings system cleanly from the jump. None of that erases the records or the offensive production, but it does frame the real question for the 2026 season, and probably for everything that comes after it. The player-led nature of this Fever roster means Clark, Boston, and Mitchell are going to need real time together to grow on the defensive end. Finding each other in pick and roll and transition is one thing, and they've already shown they can do that at a high level. But talking through rotations, switching assignments, communicating when a cutter is slipping through a gap, that stuff only comes from repetitions you can get by actually playing games together, real games, not shoot-arounds, not walkthroughs, not exhibitions. The opener was always going to have rough edges because of that, and it did. Stephanie White has a specific task in front of her now. She has to build a defensive identity around three elite offensive players. Three players who command attention, who draw help, who change how defenses approach any given night. And she has to build it fast enough to matter when the playoffs arrive. Because an Indiana Fever team that can put 73 combined points on the board from its three stars on any given night and still lose because of what happens on the other end is a dangerous team in the regular season and a vulnerable one in a playoff series against teams that are disciplined and well coached. Clark put it plainly after the game. The offense is obviously not the issue, and she's right. But the Wings walked out of Gainsbridge Fieldhouse with the W, and a team that gives up 107 points on opening night, even in a game full of historic offensive performances, has real work to do. The thing to watch in 2026 isn't the points or the records or the behind-the-back passes, as electric as all of that is. The thing to watch is whether Stephanie White can find the defensive glue that holds this roster together when the games matter most. Whether the communication and cohesion that only come from playing together can develop quickly enough to match what the offense is already capable of providing. Whether the bench depth is real. Whether the rotation can hold up when Billings or Hall isn't fully available. Clark is 54 games into her WNBA career. She's already passed Diana Taurasi's record for reaching the 1,250-250 rebound-assist combination. She's the fastest point guard in league history to 1,000 career points. She has more 25-5 games than anyone else in the history of this league at this pace. The question for 2026 isn't whether she belongs in the all-time conversation. That question has been answered. The question is how many more records fall before the season ends, and whether the team around her develops enough to turn a historic offensive ceiling into a deep playoff run. 8 records fell in a single game in Indianapolis, and the team that broke them went home with a loss. That's not a contradiction. That's just where the Indiana Fever are right now. Extraordinary on one end, unfinished on the other, and with an entire season ahead of them to figure out the difference. This is Game 1 of 44. The window is open. The work has just begun.
Start with the 1,000-point milestone, because 2 separate records fell on that number alone. Clark became the fastest point guard in WNBA history to reach 1,000 career points, doing it in 54 games. And she's also the 6th fastest player overall in league history to reach that mark, regardless of position. So she's not just rewriting the point guard record book, she's sitting near the top of the all-time list across every position this league has ever produced, which puts her in a very short group of players at this stage of a career. But those first 2 records, as impressive as they are on their own, aren't the one that really lands hardest when you understand the full picture. Reaching 1,000 points is one thing. Reaching 1,000 points while also piling up 250 rebounds and 250 assists is a completely different level of all-around production. Because that combination requires you to score, rebound, and distribute at a rate that most guards in this league simply don't come close to. Clark did all 3 in 54 games, and in doing so, she broke a record that Diana Taurasi held. Taurasi, widely considered one of the greatest players in the history of women's basketball, needed 62 games to reach that same threshold. Clark did it in 8 fewer. 8 fewer games against one of the most accomplished players this sport has ever seen. The 4th record might be the one that ages best of all, though. Clark now has the most 20-point, 5-rebound, 5-assist games in the entire WNBA, and she's done it in fewer games than anyone else in league history. That's not hitting those numbers once or twice and writing an article about it. That's doing it at a rate nobody in this league has ever matched, and every game she plays adds to a gap that's already difficult to close. Records 5 through 8 all belonged to the team. Mitchell's 30 points breaking the Fever's season opener scoring record. Clark, Mitchell, and Boston becoming only the 3rd trio in WNBA history to all crack 20 in an opener, a franchise first for Indiana. The team setting a franchise high for points in a season opener, and then both teams together creating the first opening night matchup in WNBA history where both sides finished above 100, ending at 107-104. Clark described the pace of that game afterward by saying no one could breathe, and watching the film, that's not an exaggeration at all. Both teams were flying, both teams were executing, and the result was something this league had genuinely never seen before on an opening night. 8 records, a franchise-first offensive trio, a night that will be talked about for a long time. And the Fever lost. It's worth being straight about that, rather than letting the record count and the highlight reel soften what actually happened on the floor, because the reasons Indiana lost this game are the same reasons they'll lose again if nothing changes. Dallas shot 59% from the field and 52% from 3. Those numbers don't show up accidentally.
The Wings ran their spacing and ball movement system cleanly all night, exploited transition opportunities every time Indiana's defense was slow to rotate, and made the Fever pay for those late rotations over and over again. 12 three-pointers on 23 attempts is not a team getting hot. That's a team finding clean looks because the defense kept giving them the same openings on repeat. Clark herself admitted afterwards she felt she was literally a couple of buckets away from putting together a really good game. That's probably accurate, but the offensive fouls are a correctable problem and one that cannot keep happening against teams with the offensive firepower Dallas showed. Stephanie White said post-game that Indiana can't expect to win games by trying to outscore opponents night after night, and that the Fever need more defensive discipline and cohesion as a unit moving forward. That's an honest assessment. Clark, Boston, and Mitchell combined for 73 points, and Indiana still lost. That tells you something real about what the rest of this roster needs to provide, and about how much defensive work still needs to happen before this team can genuinely consider itself a championship contender.